I did a review comparing the Sony XB23 versus the Sony XB33. Bit underwhelmed with the Sony XB23. Main issue I've got with the speaker is 60% and above, rapid, huge roll off in that bass, making it sound very thin and brittle. Now, if you just want absolutely clear sound and you're not listening to particularly dynamic music and you just want it for podcasts, it's fine. I have had people coming on and defending the Sony XB23, and that's absolutely fine. Giving you my personal opinion and backed up with some measurements that actually there's quite a little bit of roll off in the top end. Now you can argue, well, it goes pretty loud for the size. It goes as loud as the XB33, his bigger brother, but it's doing that by completely rolling off the bass. That's the trick. Now, maybe for most people, well, that's good enough. It's not a huge speaker, and we're happy with it. Well, that's fine. I think what I needed to do was address the questions it left. Well, what are the alternatives? Most people are talking about the JBL Flip 5 when it comes to the Sony XB23 in comparison. Now, you look at them head to head, and that looks a lot smaller. I can tell you the actual weights are not that different. 540 grams for the Flip 5, 580 grams, hardly anything in it in terms of weight, but quite a bit in it in terms of size. And this morning, checking on Amazon in the UK, they're both £90 speakers, depending on the deal you get. Some colours are different. Pink seems to be the cheapest colour you can get with JBL. And I've also got, you know, the bargain down in the sub £50 arena, the Tribit Maxsound Plus. Check-ins, now, normally around 40 quid. Checking this morning, you could actually get this for £35. You can get 3 of these for either one of those. So I thought, let's see, people are saying, well, that's not really that bad. The point is, what could they have done with a speaker that size? Is there really an alternative? And should we really have expected it to be a little bit better than it is? So yeah, these are the 3 I'm going to have in this comparison. Now, just to quickly tell you the comparisons, as I said, £90, £90, £35. It's cheap, and so it really is a great sounding, neutral sounding speaker. In fact, before I get even into the specs, what to expect from these speakers, measuring them each at 66% volume. Just quickly show you what they look like in a frequency response test.
JBL Flip 5, as you can see, full bass. There is a bit of a dip, 2.5 kilohertz to 200 hertz, so it's weak on mids. Another dip, around 4.5 kilohertz to about 11 kilohertz. We're talking plus or minus just over 4 decibels. That's a pretty good result, but with weak mids, bass down to around 65 hertz. Maxsound Plus, £50 speaker with impressively flat frequency response, plus or minus 3.5 decibels. Pretty full bass, pretty flat all across the frequency response. Bass down to around 65 hertz, but plus or minus 3.5 decibels. Sony XB23 at 66%. Bear in mind, these are all 66%. Other volumes may vary. Pretty wavy, plus or minus around 4 decibels with bass down to around 70 hertz. So all 3 at 66% volume. The Maxsound Plus clearly the flattest, but none of them are terrible, other than the XB23 bass is not particularly low compared to the other 2 speakers. This is with a frequency sweep. Real life results vary due to heavy digital sound processing.
Now, also bear in mind, the Maxsound Plus is the oldest speaker of the bunch, coming out in January 2019, August 2019 for JBL, May this year for the Sony XB23. It's brand new. Now, what that does mean is we get Bluetooth 5. That may be a deal breaker for you. The other 2 are both Bluetooth 4.2. Also what you get with Sony is their LDAC codec and AAC. So it is a nice codec if you're playing, high quality music. That does make a difference. I know there are arguments, can you really hear it or not? To me, I personally think I can hear a difference. Obviously, it must be preferable to have a higher end codec than a lower end codec where information is clearly going to be lost. And the argument of whether you can hear it or not is another matter. In terms of how long are they going to play for, at maximum volume, the Flip 5, I can get 6 hours, 45 minutes out of that. I can get 3 hours out of the Maxsound Plus. It should be noted, the Maxsound Plus runs at 7.4 7.4 volts. That's why it's not so good in in maximum battery life. But obviously, they're making a serious speaker here. 7.4 volts. You know, they're favouring a little bit of power over battery life. They've done that obviously because they're quite serious about this speaker. And the other two are both 3.7 volts. But it is a bigger battery altogether, and it's 3.7 volts. 4,800 milliamps is the biggest battery on the Flip 5. You're going to get the most battery life. But, you know, Sony XB23, I've said it before, it's almost sort of like they're faking the battery life. It doesn't really play at maximum volume. As soon as you start playing at maximum volume, and you're continuous playing, it will gradually reduce the volume. If I'm kind, I'm saying there's no real reduction for about 5 minutes. That's being kind. But in total, it will play for 4 hours, 38 minutes. But it won't be at maximum volume. It'll be a much lower volume by the time you're hitting 4 hours, 38 minutes. Whereas with a Flip 5, 6 hours, 45 minutes, that's maximum volume all the way through. I think for a lot of people, that alone may well be a deal breaker. Neither of them are any good, really, for YouTube. I found the latency on all of them poor. Typically JBL are not very good. Well, the speakers I've tested, not very good. 200 milliseconds, that's basically unusable, really. And I have to say the same for the Maxsound Plus, but the newest Sonys are doing better. However, the XB23 not up to what the XB43 and 33 were doing. 120 milliseconds, that's still noticeable lag. Should be noted, you can pair these in stereo, but you can't with the Maxsound Plus. I don't know why we still can't get a Maxsound Plus with true wireless stereo pairing, because they're going to clean up a lot of sounds. I would have thought that, you know, it's already cheap enough and sounds good enough. At 35 quid, if only we could play them in stereo, what a little treasure we would have. It is the only on the Maxsound Plus that you will find an auxiliary input. None of them can be used as a power bank. You can use all of them as a phone speaker, except for the Flip 5, where, you know, JBL have been putting features, so you can't use that to answer your calls and make calls, which should be noted, of course. Flip 5 mono speaker, one racetrack driver, and as I like to say, racetrack means it goes really fast. Well, it doesn't really mean much other than it's more surface area with an elongated shape than a single circular driver, although there are other issues to take into account. We are talking physics at the end of the day. However, it is a mono speaker. It does have two passive radiators. These two both have two woofers and two passive radiators. Get straight into it then. 50% test means 49% for the XB23, 40% for the Flip 5, and 43% for the Maxsound Plus. Why am I playing them at different volumes? Well, at those volumes, they are all measuring the same in terms of LUFS, a measurement of perceived loudness. So to your ears, they're about the same volume at those volume steps. That's my starting point, and then post-processing, I normalize them for any small differences that remain. 50% test.
I've been looking for answers, something more. Holding the past in my hands, now I'm fighting for someone I've ignored. To find who I am, and I've been taking all the time I need to get back to me. And missing all the ways that you and I used to be. Now I'm putting the fire to the floor.
So the XB23 has the thinnest bass, but it has the biggest upper bass. 130 Hz, minus 21.5, minus 22 Flip 5, minus 24 Maxsound Plus. The bass peak, 90 Hz. That's when the XB23 falls behind by a couple of decibels to the Flip 5 and the Maxsound Plus. In terms of 60 Hz, a massive 6 dB off the Flip 5, 3 dB off the Maxsound Plus.
So for me, at those volumes, it has the biggest, deepest, roundest bass. That's clear to be heard on the JBL Flip 5, but it's a bit lifeless, it's a bit dull. It is a mono speaker at the end of the day, and for me, at these volumes, it lacks a bit of drive. It's dull sounding, but at the end of the day, clearly has the better bass. XB23, even at these volumes, where it still retains some bass, to me sounds on the thin side, but it sounds reasonably balanced, sounds reasonably clear, but still, given look at its size, you could be well expecting a bit more bass out of that, and it's not like they couldn't have, because the Maxsound Plus is pulling more bass, and you do get clarity, bass and clarity. It sits somewhere in between these two at these volumes, the bass, the clarity, but all of them in the Maxsound Plus, so in between the others. So I've got to do a bit louder, 75%, which means 76% on the XB23, 66% on the Flip 5, 73% on the Maxsound Plus. It should be pointing out the volume steps on all three of these speakers are very different. So 75% test.
How you say we're taking on water, yeah, we're sinking now. You're looking all concerned, like we're gonna drown. But we both know how to swim, no worries as we'll fall now. Let's take it slow, where you go, I go too. And if you hit the bottom, I'm going down with you. Let's take it slow, who cares where we gotta be? You know you'll have a good time wherever you're with me. Let's take it. I drag you out your mind, and there are days I hate you, but baby, you're still mine. And we have the best times, no matter what we do. And even when we don't, there's nobody I'd rather choose. Let's take it slow, where you go, I go too. And if you hit the bottom, I'm going down with you. Let's take it.
At 76% volume, Sony XB23 already has a significant bass roll-off. It's all about the mids and the highs now. Even upper bass, 150 Hz, minus 26, 3 dB off the Flip 5, decibel and a half off the Maxsound Plus. Bass peak minus 28, 8 decibels off the Flip 5 and off the Maxsound Plus. And deeper bass, 60 Hz, 13 decibels off the Flip 5, 11 decibels off the Maxsound Plus.
So in many ways, much closer now. At 75%, when I say 75%, it's 75% on the XB23, and then comparing the others at what sounds like the same volume. So pretty close, except for the main differences. You have a lack of mids. It is a bit of a V shape on the JBL Flip 5. There is a bit more clarity, but you're still aware of the lack of clarity that you would have had if the mids were more balanced. But clearly that's the JBL tuning, and that's what they intended. So yeah, there is a decent bass, even more so now. The XB23, just too bass thin for me personally, and I think they could have done more. When you hear it against these other options, you know there could have been more to come. The Maxsound Plus, got to remember, 1/3 of the price of these speakers, and even more of a difference depending on the colour and the deal you get. So it is possible to have done it. and it's still the best balanced, as the frequency response charts will say. And in reality, you know, even with all the processing going on, it remains, to me, the most balanced. There's clarity. Some of you may find it a little bit too sharp, but it still sits between them for me. In terms of performance to price, in terms of that's clearly the winner. Let's push them a bit more. 90% on the XB23. So what actually means 89% on the volume steps on my phone, XB23. Same now, Flip 5, 89%. Nearly maximum 96% on the Maxsound Plus.
Only time here on my hands to think upside down, lost and found. Voices all come out and scream aloud. And I close my eyes. In bed I lie, awake till morning comes. My heart just breaking for all we left undone. In my head this carnival, it seemed like it'd be fun, but now we've only time here on our hands to run upside down, lost and found. Voices all come out and scream aloud. And I close my eyes.
89% now for the XB23 and the Flip 5. Maxsound Plus needing to go to 96% to be around the same loudness of the other two speakers. But look at the massive bass cut on the XB23. The only saving grace is the Maxsound Plus also has a bit of a bass cut, so at its upper bass, minus 27, 6 dB off Flip 5, but only half a decibel off the Maxsound Plus. But as soon as you get into the deeper bass, so bass peak minus 32.5, 6 dB off the Flip 5, 5 dB off the Maxsound Plus. I mean, it's on another planet, the XB23, given its size. Deep bass, 13 dB off the Flip 5, 10 dB off the Maxsound Plus.
So I think, you know, basically the differences are still clear and have been clear all the way through. You do get clarity with the XB23. It is reasonably balanced, say 60% and below, but still sounds on the bass light side. And once you get over those volumes, it's not just sounding on bass light, it is bass light. The bass really isn't there at all. Maxsound Plus holding its own all the way through, managing to retain some bass. Can't match the bass on the Flip 5. The Flip 5 does manage to pull out more bass, but it's very lacking in mids. This is a very balanced sound on the Maxsound Plus. Too balanced, possibly, for a lot of people, but you would call this a neutral sounding speaker. Amazing for a £35 speaker. Amazing that they can do a balanced sound, extending right up into the high end, and amazing that they'd even bother to at the budget end. The JBL Flip 5 doing probably what it's intended, giving you a decent bass wallop, given its size, even if it is mono. Well, let's push them. What is the headroom that we've got left on these speakers? What can they really do when we push them? Maximum volume.
Take a moment, a little rest. Breathe it in and get it off your chest. But now we gotta move. Take a breath and use it.
So the XB23 does go louder, quite a bit louder, but it's all mids and highs. There's no bass. Absolute loudness, 16.8. It's 2D up on the Flip 5, 4 dB up on the Maxsound Plus. Same story in peaks. It's now 3 dB up on the Flip 5, 5 dB up on the Maxsound Plus. But it's all about that bass. If you don't need bass, you're fine. So it has a massive 200 Hz peak on the Sony XB23, clearly trying to make up for that massive loss of bass. That does give it a bigger upper bass peak. 2 dB up on Flip 5, 5.5 dB up on the Maxsound Plus. But that's a boost. There's nothing natural about it. In terms of bass peak, minus 30, 4 dB down on the Flip 5 is the same bass peak as the Maxsound Plus. But then you get to the lower bass, minus 46 on the little Maxsound Plus. Still 9 decibels better, deeper than the XB23, the Flip 5, 12 decibels. We're not talking subwoofer deep bass, we're talking 60 Hz deep bass. It isn't there at all at these volumes, even though technically Sony XB23 is going louder. It's doing that by not bothering with any sort of bass.
For the XB23, you know, it goes the loudest. Yes, they can claim, oh, our speaker goes louder than the Flip 5 and even louder than the £35 Maxsound Plus, as though that's some feather in their cap. The thing is, are they really saying they're hitting a limit with distortion? Why are they robbing it of so much bass? And they're doing that from like 70% and up. There's basically no bass there. They're claiming X sound, the X balance drivers or whatever they're calling it, is all about minimizing distortion. So on that basis, you'd expect them to be doing better, retaining more bass at the maximum volumes, at the higher volumes. And if it's not about distortion, all they're trying to do then is get more volume out of it. Well, they don't need to at this size. They've got the XB33, they've got the XB43. They could have made it a bit more balanced. So they could have said, all right, I mean, they could have reduced those highs and those mids and given it a bit over to the bass. And then it would sound more balanced. It just wouldn't be technically as loud, but I would think more people would be happy. So you've got to think, have they really, is it that there really isn't the headroom there? Are those drivers really distorting so low? Now, I could test that. I could use an equalizer and test that, but do I really want to spend my life with an XB23? For me personally, I mean, people are going to come on and defend it, but for me personally, they could have and should have done a lot better with this speaker. Given its size, given its price, 90 quid, given what a £35 speaker can actually do, given the might of Sony behind it, would be just, and because at the end of the day, I mean, if they're taking on the Flip 5, because just in terms of weight, I mean, actually the covering feels quite, someone's saying, well, it's quite rugged. Well, so's the Flip 5. It's a lot, same weight, but a lot smaller. You can travel with two of those. I do travel with two of those. It's great fun. A pair of these Flip 5s to me, hell of a lot nicer to listen to, or more fun to listen to, than a single Flip 5. Really come alive with a pair. But that's a brilliant size to travel with. And then you can have a pair of them, which is not much bigger than, in terms of the room it will take up in your bag, in your rucksack or whatever, than the Sony XB23. So I really don't know what they were thinking or what they were aiming at with the XB23. JBL Flip 5 does retain bass. It's still got bass. It doesn't go particularly loud, but you retain a lot of bass. I mean, and that's the thing. Absolute headroom. I mean, in 60 Hertz, if we call that deep bass, but it's not subwoofer territory. I was at minus 55, 12 dB off the Flip 5. Both 90 quid. That's, you'd think, oh, look, a bigger enclosure. 12 decibels off in sort of mid to low bass. That's crazy. The 30 quid, £35 Maxsound Plus. Still got the same bass weight at around the 100 Hz bass peak on that particular track, but minus 46, it's retaining 9 dB more in terms of deep bass. It's crazy. Anyway, so I know a lot of people wanted to see and hear the comparison. I did as well. That's why I did it. Flip 5 against the XB23, quite similar in many ways, except that's even more travel friendly than Flip 5. And it's hard to say, yeah, get the XB23 because I don't know, because you listen to podcasts and it's going to make speech a lot clearer. And you can stand it on its end It's designed to stand on the end. It's got cutouts there, so you're not really affecting that passive radiator on that end too much, whereas with the, you're covering it if you do that with the Flip 5. Is that really why you'd buy the Sony? Because you can play it that way around? I don't know. And then you'd have a pair of them. I don't know. It's really confusing me, the XB23, how they'd go to market, what they were thinking when they sat around that table and said, right, let's produce that because it's going to successfully compete in terms of, I don't know, other than if you had the XB22, if you had the XB22, maybe you'd automatically, if you're a Sony fanboy, get the XB23. I don't know. Anyway, hope you got something out of my video, and I thank you for watching.